Welcome to the Association 4.0 podcast, your association's no-fluff playbook to navigating and thriving in Industry 4.0 or the digital marketplace. Each week, we bring expert insights to help you and your association stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, my name is Sherry Budziak, and I am the host of this week's podcast. I'm here today with Stephen Peeler. Stephen is the Executive Director of the IDSA Foundation. I'm so excited to have you, Stephen, to talk to us today about your leadership and what you guys have been doing during the pandemic, and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Sherry. It's a pleasure to be on the call with you today, and hopefully we'll be able to share some tidbits for some of the executives that listen to your podcast.
Great. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and I've known you for, I don't even know, it seems like forever, but the audience hasn't. So tell us a little bit about you and the organization that you're leading.
Absolutely. I think you and I met probably 10 years ago when I was with ASAE, leading the ASAE Foundation. Since then, I've worked for a couple other trade associations as well. And now with the Infectious Disease Society of America Foundation. We are a $1.6 million foundation, philanthropic arm of IDSA. IDSA is a medical society and 74 staff, budget about $31 million with about $40 million in reserves. And one of the, I'm sure, few organizations that has had tremendous growth during the pandemic. So here we are today trying to go into overdrive while everyone knows what infectious disease is.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about I know you guys have had tremendous growth with, I guess if you look at, the challenges, a lot of people, we've all had challenges with the pandemic, but there is also some opportunities there. And I think obviously with IDSA, there were some ways that you guys could expand and grow. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think like most organizations, we saw the pandemic as an opportunity to not only change our business model, really change the way that we thought about our staff. Ironically, we were moving into brand new offices the week of everything shutting down.
Wow.
So that Friday, we were supposed to move into some brand new offices in Arlington, Virginia. And needless to say, it almost feels a little eerie when you walk in there because all of the totes and the boxes are still unpacked sitting on everyone's desk.
Wow.
And we really still haven't been back yet. So I think for us, it was a matter of what were we going to stop doing so that we could ramp up in the pandemic preparedness as well as a response. Our doctors, as you could imagine, are the frontline clinicians and physicians who are seeing patients, advising ER rooms, coming up with vaccine development, et cetera. And I guess from a layman's perspective, as I always tell my parents, if you don't know anything about infectious diseases, just think of everything from AIDS to Zika. So we saw SARS, we saw polio, et cetera. If you think of who our members are, it would be Dr. Fauci is a member and a donor. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who leads the CDC, is also a donor and a member, longtime member as well. So those folks are seeing a lot of burnout, and we had to make sure that we were supporting them with the critical guidelines that they were looking for so that they could treat patients in this new pandemic.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about what are some of the opportunities that you guys saw?
Absolutely. So first one was our real-time learning network. Since we knew that the eyes would be upon us, and we have a standing call, for instance, with CDC and NIH from a public health perspective. We knew that whether you're treating a patient with AIDS and COVID or hepatitis B or C with COVID, that more and more people were going to be looking to us for that advice and for those guidelines. We actually created rapid guidelines. So we've surged and work in that area, hired numerous people during the pandemic in the guidelines department. And as a result, we are now chugging away and put a few things on the back burner that we couldn't focus on any longer, such as some of our face-to-face meetings and some of our other training opportunities. Everything obviously is now moving online. Our annual conference this year was online as well as last year, which was in the fall, September, October timeframe.
Yeah, well, and I know guidelines development in the past, right? Kind of there's a long process for that. So being able to adjust and ramp up with information that is needed quickly, that was great that you guys were able to do that. So I guess what have been some of the challenges that you guys have had?
Well, I would say the first one really was moving our conference online. I mean, just like almost everyone in our space, we are very conservative when it comes to keeping people safe, keeping our staff safe, keeping them mentally sound, if you will. And because of the flattening of our revenue as a result of the exhibitor revenue, and just as a matter of background for your listeners, 25% of our attendees for our conference called ID Week are international. So even though we knew that the conference last year was virtual and we pulled the trigger to put this one virtual for this fall back in March, and even though a lot of organizations are still trying to do hybrids, we knew that that was going to have a major impact on our revenue. So from the grant writing side, the foundation was able to write an initial grant of $2 million to the CDC to help offset any losses. So we actually had a flat year last year and actually grew because of the stock market and other reserves as a result. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did was that we put the resources into front-facing tools, learning opportunities for our members. And basically, from a fundraising perspective, I told our donors, we're not going to ask you for money last year in the middle of the pandemic because we knew that they were facing pay cuts, pay freezes, bonus freezes, et cetera, let alone burnout because of all the hours that they're having to put in because of pandemic. And even though things seemed to be opening up about a month ago, here we are again. And our doctors are just so frustrated with people not wearing the mask and being safe and socially distancing, et cetera. So I basically took that surge team that I created last year to help us with that grant writing and research. And we focused this year on corporate business development just so that we could grow the organization. I did not want to come through this pandemic and say, well, I coulda, shoulda, woulda, or how about this company or that company that is now in the pandemic preparedness space or in the response. So I think that's probably one of our accomplishments as well as pivots during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize, unless you're working with medical societies, that I think generally people understood that physicians and nurses and those that were taking care of people were at burnout, but the fact that they were having reductions in their salaries and things like that too, because of the impact on the hospitals and all those other things. It was kind of this, domino effect, which was a real challenge. So to your point, how do you then go and say, can you, give the foundation money, even if they're a really, great supporter of the organization? It was just, yeah, it's a challenging time. So talk to me a little bit more about, I know that you guys put together a team to kind of help figure out where there are opportunities for grants and things like that. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and how you kind of ramped up that team?
Sure. So starting last May, I think, May 1st to be exact, we pulled together 9 grant writers and researchers from across the country. And initially, the thought was, how could we reach out to people that were in our swim lane or in our space of funding, whether it's public health, diversity, inclusion. As you know, healthcare disparities really reared its ugly head during this pandemic, workforce development, et cetera. So we started going down a path and looked at 7 different opportunity areas for the foundation. And since then, we narrowed it down to really 3 pillars: mentorship, workforce development, and diversity and inclusion. And in a nutshell, we figured that through this lens of looking at and turning over all these stones of potential funders, that there were over 600 opportunities totaling nearly $60 million in funding potential for us. Now, granted, not every grant is going to be worth pursuing. So we ramped up our focus, or really narrowed our focus to grants that would be minimum of $250,000, minimum of 3 years in length. And as you could imagine, it's going to be the Gates Foundation or Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the large players that are out there. But what we also realized at the end of that summer surge of research and development were 2 things. We were lacking in the program rigor and program experience. As I mentioned initially, we're $1.6 billion budget at the time. So how are you going to ask the Gates Foundation for $1 million if you're only $1.6 million as it is?
Right.
So we went to our current funders and corporate partners, and lo and behold, it looks like we're going to tip out about $4.1 million this year. So just without even touching any of those organizations with the potential of the $60 million, we went to our existing partners and we were able to raise our fundraising to $4 million. That gave us the sea legs, if you will, to be able to ask for a much larger gift. Simultaneously, as I said, we really didn't have the program rigor. So I brought on board a consultant to help us look at the programs. And we're very excited to say that in January, we should have the only national program to reach out to medical students in the workforce development area in a medical society. I just haven't seen it. We've done an environmental scan of almost all 45 of the medical societies out there, and most people will have some type of outreach to medical students and residents to get them into fellowship. But what we realized is, to prepare for the next pandemic, we really need a significant number of doctors to come through the pathway to go in a diverse manner as well, to serve the patients of color in those areas as well.
Wow, that's fantastic. So Stephen, guess what do you feel that people in your role that are executive directors of foundation, as you've led, from your experience, like what can those leaders do right now to position their organizations for success?
Great question. I think what I would recommend is that you really play 3-dimensional chess. You take and compartmentalize your business units, whether it's going to be your technology and your infrastructure, to make sure, for instance, like us, we have 22 different tools that we're now trying to put onto one platform so that we can gather, whether it's a grant funder or corporate funder or engagement reports from our donors and our members, into one bucket. We're looking at our 40%, nearly 40% of our members, 12,000 members that are giving to the society. We think that that's pretty high in comparison to most others. How can we make sure that we're continuing that growth and still implementing moves management into major gifts, major gifts being $10,000 or more. Then I would compartmentalize the corporate outreach. A lot of organizations like ours focused on 1 week a year, the annual conference, and everybody has to activate over that 1 year. Well, I looked at it from a foundation perspective and say, what can I do to have our team focus on the other 51 weeks a year? So we're putting together a comprehensive membership and corporate partnership or industry partnership program that will look at all 51 weeks of the year. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the grant writing. It's a different skill set. It's a different muscle for us. It was something very new. And when you're dealing with health, public health, and programs from independent private foundations, family foundations, or some of the large organizations that we're all familiar with, the challenge is, what impact will you have? Most of us in the association space do programs and projects that are really inward facing. Oh, I want more doctors to get into a leadership society, or I want more doctors to be trained to go onto our board and diversify our boards. But what do you do for public health? What are you doing to impact a much broader audience? And that's really that next tier that we're focusing on. So that's what I would do. Compartmentalize your fundraising, but also make sure that you have the program rigor simultaneously to support that fundraising.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess, what are you seeing kind of as your next kind of the next area of growth for your organization?
Well, now that we put the infrastructure in place, it really is about writing it out and executing on the different programs and rolling that out, telling people, whether it's in a corporate space or individual donor space, this is what we're doing. This is who we are. This is our narrow focus. We're not going to talk about this shiny object or that shiny object. We're just focused on the things that we know that we can do well, the areas that will align with the strategic plan of the society, because we don't want to have a competition that's similar to many association foundations where you have a CEO that oversees both organizations and a treasurer that oversees both. So whether I get a $10 million grant or foundation or gift, that won't necessarily go to society programs. It's really where their program lives and how we can be good ambassadors for that. So I think that the next 3 to 5 years will continue to grow from 1.6 million in 2020 to probably $10 million within the next 5 years, ambitiously.
Wow, that's great. So Stephen, I do have one more question for you, because as you're talking about this, and as a business owner myself, and we had to scale not as significantly as you did this year, but we had to scale too. And there's those with that rapid kind of growth, there's some growing pains, or, how do you onboard your onboarding staff, and you're trying to find the right expertise. And can you talk to me a little bit about what that was like for you? And, I'm thinking there's a lot of things maybe you could tell us about, like, the both using, FTEs and freelancers, to how now we're remote. So how do you make sure everybody stays engaged, and from a management leadership standpoint? I think there's a lot I could unpack here with you. So any words of advice or any, lessons learned would be great to hear.
Absolutely. That's something I definitely learned during the pandemic, a new word, fractional workforce. I did not know that there was such a thing.
Yes.
I've heard of the gig economy, and I've heard of all kinds of part-time consultants, but I did not know that it was actual fractional workforce. So we have 4 full-time FTEs within the foundation, program manager, a fundraiser, myself, our CEO, and then operations manager. So actually 5. And right now we have a team of about 41 fractional workers.
Wow.
And what I know, so it is a lot to manage. I would say lesson learned is make sure that you have people that are subject matter experts and very good at what they do, and give them the opportunity to bring that skill to your team. So for instance, I have 5 people working in business development, reaching out to corporations. I also have 4 people working behind them just to do the backgrounders because I don't want these high power uh, business development people focusing their time on, well, does this company align? Do they not align? Who do I contact?
Mhm.
So um, we pull in the tools to build the relationships, and I have them focusing on the relationships. Another lesson learned is um, just like on the grant writing, if this is not something that you're going to do on a regular basis, I would definitely have a subject matter expert as a senior grant writer, someone that could advise and work with your senior staff at the society as well as your volunteers to pull that program together, especially since we're talking about a national program of about $2.3 million for our student interest group, and another program once the people come into the field of ID to mentor them with another $2.3 million program. This takes a lot of work. It's a heavy lift, but you just have to find a way to get the best of the best. And I would say, while we're all very familiar with whether it's hospitality or someone to do a strategic plan, when it comes to fundraising and program development, that's a whole nother wheelhouse. And while some skills are transferable, you really need to make sure that you have people, even if it's just 5 hours a week, just to work on one little project for you, that you're able to do that and not have to worry about looking over the shoulder. Because as the executive director, last thing you have time for is 41
Yeah.
direct reports. You really need just about 3 or 4 people that can lead those teams, for you. So they have to have that skill.
Yeah, I think it's a really important message because um, we see a lot of organizations that get really busy and they're saying, well, should we hire a full-time person? But if you can scale up and then scale down, or just if there are specific projects and you can use a fractional worker for a certain amount of time and then they, move on to job next, it allows you to grow rapidly. And then, you don't have to worry about, okay, now I've got, all this overhead and things like that. So that's great. That's great, Stephen. And you're right. The all area of grants and fundraising, that's way out of my wheelhouse. Like that is definitely a specialty that is, go look for the experts there. So anything else that you want to just add before we leave today?
Yes, it's talk about experts. I hope you don't mind if I say put in a plug for you as well as Dawn. The OrgSource team has done a great job helping us during this process. I don't have time to test and look at all the different databases, for instance, that were out there and how they will work with the 22 plus products that I have, let alone the 8 different revenue sources that I'm trying to manage. So to be able to give that piece to you and your team has really been a tremendous help for us. It's freed me up to focus on other things, raising money to pay for the infrastructure. But again, this is a great example of, you find people that's what they do, that's their sweet spot, give it to them and let them run with it, and you don't have to think twice about it. So I would say I'm here if anyone has any questions, would like to follow up with me. I know it's a unique model, but again, I did not want a pandemic to come and go and say I coulda, shoulda, woulda reached out and grown tremendously as we have this year.
And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
IDSA Foundation.org.
All
That's
right.
IDSA Foundation.org. Thank you.
Well, this is great. Thank you so much. I know you're busy. I really appreciate you spending the time with me today, and it was great to catch up. And I hope that we can actually see each other in person soon. Maybe play some golf or something at some point here if we ever get out of this. So I really appreciate it. Not that I'm a good golfer, but anyway, anything to do these days, I'm open to it. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I look forward to connecting with you beyond a virtual hug.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and discovered tips and information that will add value to your leadership style and your association. .org Source specializes in positioning teams for success with solutions for technology, strategy, and marketing. Please contact us at info@orgsource.com or visit www.orgsource.com to find out how to keep your organization on track to Association 4.0.